Welcome to Insight. Now, this was to have been the night David Trimble and Ian Paisley went head-to-head in televised debates on the referendum. If you missed the news, it's not happening. Not on UTV, not on the BBC. The whys and wherefores are history. Well, David Trimble is on Insight tonight, as it happens, and we do have a head-to-head debate. Bob McCartney and Lord Alderdice are here for that. But we begin with an analysis of a day of some important developments. Tony Blair was in Belfast, seeking to sway the waverers in a speech at Balmoral. And at the Ulster Hall, loyalists rallied for a yes vote, and the media had a particular interest to see what sort of reception awaited Michael Stone, the multiple murderer who is out of the maze on parole. Conor McCauley reports.
Michael Stone entered the Ulster Hall tonight to a hero's welcome. 1,500 loyalists packed the venue to demonstrate their support for a yes vote next Friday and for Michael Stone and his UDA colleagues. Stone made it onto the platform and took the applause. The scenes only slightly more muted than those of the Balcombe Street gang at the Sinn Féin Ardèche last weekend, which so rankled many wavering unionists. The Prime Minister knows prisoners is one of the issues most likely to make the undecided voter plump for no next Friday. Today he tried to reassure people, particularly unionists, that their concerns on prisoners, policing and decommissioning would be met.
People want to know that if these parties are going to benefit from proposals in the agreement, such as accelerated prisoner releases and ministerial posts, their commitment to democratic, non-violent means must be established in an objective, meaningful, verifiable way. Those who have used the twin tactics of the ballot box and the gun must make a clear choice. There can be no fudge between democracy and terror. The agreement is what has to be implemented in all its parts. So in clarifying whether the terms and spirit of the agreement are being met and whether violence has genuinely been given up for good, I believe we have to set out a range of factors to take into account in making that judgment. First and foremost, a clear and unequivocal commitment that there is an end to violence for good on the part of Republicans and loyalists alike, that the so-called war is finished, done with, and gone. That, as the agreement says, non-violent and exclusively peaceful and democratic means are the only means to be used. Second, that again, as the agreement expressly states, the ceasefires are indeed complete and unequivocal. An end to bombings, killings, beatings, claimed or unclaimed, an end to targeting and the procurement of weapons, progressive abandonment and dismantling of paramilitary structures, actively directing and promoting violence. Third, full cooperation with the Independent Commission on Decommissioning to implement the provisions of the agreement. Fourth, no other organizations being deliberately used as proxies for violence. Now, these factors provide then evidence upon which to base an overall judgment, a judgment which will necessarily become more rigorous over time. What is more, I've decided that they must be given legislative expression directly and plainly in the legislation coming before Parliament in the coming weeks and months.
The speech may as well have been marked for the attention of Jeffrey Donaldson, so clearly did it address the concerns he's raised. Tonight, the Lagan Valley MP was remaining non-committal, but finding it hard to conceal his satisfaction.
Well, I think he's gone further than he has been prepared to before in terms of addressing the concerns which we have and indicating that he will put those measures that he has outlined tonight into the legislation which will follow the referendum. We need to be sure that that will happen. We need to be sure that, in fact, the terrorists will not benefit from this agreement unless they've called off their campaign of violence for good, and they are engaged in actual and ongoing decommissioning and the dismantling of their terrorist machine.
Our view is that there are those who are attempting to actually insert into the document issues that are not reflected there, the various linkages that are being talked about and the promises that appear to have been made in terms of proposed legislation, I think will all have to be considered very carefully.
During his Balmoral speech, Mr Blair said the suffering of the victims must never be forgotten. Tonight, at a Stormont reception, he heard at first hand their stories, among them that of Margaret Beach and her sister, whose parents were murdered in the Enniskillen bomb.
He's cleared up a few things for us, and I'm a little bit happier than I was.
Now, does that mean you're going to vote yes, or?
Well, I'm still not sure, but he has cleared up a few things that were niggling me.
What was annoying you?
Well, things about prisoner releases. I don't think it's fair that people can have committed such atrocities and get away with it.
At the reception too, a Catholic couple whose 18-year-old son was murdered outside a Belfast church in 1975.
Well, I wanted to meet him because I wanted to tell him that I definitely was going to vote yes on next Friday, in spite of the fact that I had lost, or we had lost, our only son, Gerard. And I know it's a big price that we're going to have to pay with the release of prisoners. But after all, there were about 600 lifers who are already out and are walking the street. And there are probably up to 1,000 who were never convicted, like the boy who shot Gerard was never convicted.
Mr Blair left Northern Ireland tonight having played what's probably his last card from a hand he admits is short on options if next Friday fails. Meanwhile, the No campaign was also spreading its message, this time in Ballymoney.
And irrespective of what happens in the future, irrespective of whatever my political future may be, I will never have to say that I betrayed the memory of those men and women. The best memorial we can give to them is to see to it that terrorism, from wherever it comes, is defeated, and that they no longer have the capability to carry out these crimes.
And that report from Conor Macaulay. Tomorrow morning, the Irish Times will publish the latest opinion poll on the referendum, and it shows significant gains for the No camp. Daglon de Braden gave me the details of how their research suggests there is a narrowing gap.
Our last poll, which was conducted in Northern Ireland just in the aftermath of the Good Friday Agreement, had 85 yes and 16 no, and that's gone down now to 69 yes and 31 no, and there's still a wide gap, but it means that the no people only have to pull back another 20% to win. Now that's unlikely that they will do that, but certainly it looks very ominous from the point of view of the overall agreement that it would appear as if a majority of unionists are intending voting no at this stage.
Is it your analysis that it is unionists and it is all to do with the prisoners issue?
It's mainly the prisoners issue is number one. There are other issues as well. There are various constitutional issues. Surprisingly, RUC reform and decommissioning rank rather low, but a very high proportion of unionists are very worried, as you know, about the prisoner releases issue. It's the most concrete, physical, clear and present manifestation of the fruits of this agreement.
And what about the political issues? Are they a problem to these people?
The constitutional issues would be a problem, of course, but they're all rather abstract, and they are for another day. The real and present issue, or the clear and present danger from their point of view, is prisoners walking the streets, perhaps a prisoner who was convicted for the murder of a person in the local town or village. The possibility that such a person could be released in the very near future and be walking the streets is something that many unionists are very alarmed about.
Daigle and de Brydon, thank you very much indeed. And remember, Bob McCartney and Lord Alderdice will be debating the agreement shortly. First, though, the Ulster Unionist leader, David Trimble, joined Insight earlier this evening. David Trimble, you've seen what the Irish Times will publish tomorrow. It confirms the trend of surveys, which is that you're losing yes votes and the no camp is gaining.
I think what it does show is the effect of Sunday's Nuremberg rally and Nuremberg-style rally in Dublin. It shows that. And I think the question then is whether that is permanent or a temporary reaction. Because, of course, this is what Adams and McGuinness intended when they orchestrated that sickening display of triumphalism to influence Unionist undecided into the no camp, which is precisely what has happened. And I think when people realise that they were being manipulated and think about it, we'll see a somewhat different situation. I'm still quite confident that come the 22nd, not only will there be a substantial yes vote, but there will be a clear yes majority amongst Unionists.
But last Sunday also focuses people on the really emotional issue within the agreement, which is the early release of prisoners. Do you now believe it was a mistake to put that in the body of the agreement?
Well, there are a number of things that have to be said about this, and I think here we've got to refer to what the Prime Minister has said today, because he has made clear the linkage between early release and there being a genuine peace demonstrated by decommissioning. And he's made it clear that that's going to go into the legislation. So people will not have the benefit of early release without there being a commitment to peace, an end of violence and decommissioning. But the other thing we have to say about this is that I think people are exploiting the emotional aspect of this issue and trying to whip up feeling with regard to the release of prisoners. I know it's a difficult subject. It was a difficult subject for John Taylor, who had been shot 10 times by Republicans. It's a difficult subject for us all. I was present when Edgar Graham was murdered, but Edgar's murderer was never caught, never imprisoned. So when people talk emotionally about letting murderers go free, we know they're out there, and hundreds of them anyway. And I think to try and exploit people's natural feelings about this is not appropriate.
But early release could have been done through legislation or through government order. It didn't have to be part of the agreement.
No, it will be done through legislation. But there will be legislation coming forward, and we'll be debating that legislation in Parliament. And I and other members of Parliament, including the leader of the Conservative opposition, has made it clear that there are things we will want to see in that legislation to make sure that it is made more effective and that the sanctions on terrorist organisations and individuals who are released are there and are effective.
But what I want to suggest to you is that some people feel that because it's part of the agreement, if they go in and put their X for yes tomorrow week, one of the things they're doing, is the equivalent of signing the early release form for murdering terrorists.
But it's not, look, I think people, if they knew that there was going to be peace, if they knew that there was going to be a genuine end of violence, then difficult though that is, it's something that people, I think, could live with. And that's why what the Prime Minister today said was so important, because he's making sure that the linkage between a genuine peace and decommissioning and the release scheme is there. So that if the tests, he spelled out various tests today, which he said will go into the legislation, and if they're not met, then the early release scheme will not occur. That's my reading of his speech. And I think that should reassure people that there'll be no releases unless the organisation to which that prisoner was affiliated has genuinely established that this is an end to their campaign and that there'll be no violence in the future.
So, in your opinion, the agreement is the agreement, and Tony Blair has told the Orange Order, amongst others, it cannot be changed, but the legislation which will bring it into effect has yet to be written, and therefore there is scope.
Well, what we need to see is that the key objectives of the agreement are achieved. And one of those is to ensure that the paramilitary groups end their violence, end it permanently, and prove that they've ended it. Now, that's in the agreement. The question that is concern that a number of people have had is, will it actually happen? And what sanction if it doesn't happen? And there was concern as to whether the sanction in the agreement was strong enough. What the Prime Minister has done today is to toughen up the sanction. He hasn't changed the agreement. The objective is still there. It's a question of having effective means to secure those objectives. And the objective, after all, is to put pressure on the paramilitary organisations to end their campaigns for good.
For 2 years, people who were watching the talks thought it was a political process about strands 1, 2 and 3 As it turns out, it's that, plus early release of prisoners, plus reform of the RUC, plus a couple of other elements. Do you feel at this stage that perhaps you could have prepared your people more to realise that it wasn't just strands 1, 2 and 3, and they were also going to have to take these on board?
Actually, the strands 1, 2 and 3 are the really important things.
But it's not what people are talking about.
I know it's not what they're talking about.
Last night with the Prime Minister, we took 6 people over to London and we talked to them for 45 minutes, and strands 1, 2 and 3 were hardly mentioned.
Yeah, but they're the really important things, because that's their constitutional position.
But it's not what people are focusing on.
Look, let me finish. The really important thing is getting the constitutional position secure, ending the democratic deficit, bringing the cross-border stuff, which the NRO has been doing behind our back, under democratic control. Now, the other things that you mentioned are the consequences of an end to violence. It's only if there's an end to violence that the question of the RUC scaling down and becoming a civilian police force rather than a paramilitary force arises. It's only if there's an end to violence the question of prisoner releases come up. These things that people are concerned about are the consequences of an end to violence. The fact that people are focusing on those rather than the structures shows that we got the structures right. If we hadn't got the structures right, the focus would have been on that. But the fact that we've got the structures right is important. And at the end of the day, it's the structures that really matter, rather than because they're the things that are going to be there for the decades, if not generations.
But that's why I'm suggesting to you, should you have prepared your people better over the period of the discussions to say when the agreement comes out, if it comes out, there will be more than strands 1, 2 and 3, so that it didn't come as a shock, and an emotional shock, which they've reacted to?
Well, there is an emotional factor, as I said earlier to you, on the prisoner issue. But look, let's be clear about this. People are exploiting the emotion. People who wanted to attack and who have been spending months preparing to attack and thought they were going to be able to do it. They were planning to attack us on cross-border bodies. They were planning to attack us on surrendering the Union. They can't do that because we haven't done either. We haven't done either of the things they threatened. So they're then scratching around looking for something else. And these emotional issues are being built up. And I think quite wrongly. And I think there is an tendency and an attempt here to exploit feeling and to misrepresent the situation in a rather shameful way.
Some unionists are still confused about the differences between the original Mitchell draft, which came out the Monday, Tuesday, and the final draft, which became the agreement. Now, I know that is a very broad question, so I will, with your permission, focus in on the decommissioning element. In the original draft and in the final draft, it says the resolution of the decommissioning issue is an indispensable part of the process of negotiation. But in the first draft, it goes on to say it is therefore an indispensable part of this agreement, and that was removed from the final draft. How did that happen?
The final draft is the draft that puts in the time frame, which says that decommissioning must be completed within 2 years. Not just started, completed. Now that makes it an indispensable part of the agreement, and that is reinforced by the cross-reference to office, by what the Prime Minister has done today. A phrase here and there is not of significance in comparison to the fact that we have introduced into the final draft a requirement that decommissioning be completed within 2 years. That's the important thing.
And what happens over those 2 years? Do you sit in government with Sinn Féin?
No, because if Sinn Féin do not start the process, and the test that laid down by the Prime Minister in his speech today was that they start cooperating immediately with, because he said in his letter to me that in his view the process should begin immediately. And so that is reinforced in his speech today, saying that they must start cooperating with the International Commission. And if they fail to do so, then they don't benefit. And there's plenty of time to sort this out, because bear in mind, there will be several months between the election and the creation of an executive. And if by that time we do not have a clear ending of violence and the addressing of decommissioning, the issue won't arise. And the Prime Minister's speech has dealt with it. So we can leave that to one side and focus on the opportunities that are there for us all in the future.
Finally and briefly, did Jeffrey Donaldson get all he wanted from the Prime Minister today, and was it a ploy? Did he go off with your blessing as a sort of tactical ploy?
Oh no, it certainly wasn't a ploy. It certainly wasn't a ploy. But as to Jeffrey's decision on the matter, give him the opportunity to study the speech and to check off the things in the speech against the matters that he was concerned about. I'm quite happy that the things are there, but of course he must look and decide for himself.
David Trimble, thank you very much.
And 8 days to go before you decide our future. We have our first head-to-head debate after a quick break.
Welcome back. Well, Bob McCartney is a Member of Parliament and leader of the UK Unionist Party. He is implacably opposed to this agreement. John Alderdice attends Westminster as a Member of the House of Lords. He leads the Alliance Party. He's equally passionate about the agreement, but he supports it. We heard in Conor Macaulay's report that the Prime Minister addressed Jeffrey Donaldson's concerns point by point. Jeffrey Donaldson is the big attainable prize for the yes camp. That could do you severe damage, couldn't it?
Well, I think what the Prime Minister offered to Jeffrey Donaldson today was the biggest load of tosh that I've ever heard.
Why?
Why? Because there was not a single concrete proposal in it that was deliverable. The agreement is a multi-party agreement. It cannot be altered, varied or amended unilaterally by any single party. If Mr. Blair attempts to put into any piece of legislation anything which is not in the agreement, then he threatens to bring the whole House of Cards down. And of course, he has already assured Adams and McGuinness that they can feel confident that the prisoners will get out, that they can feel confident that decommissioning will be no more enforceable than the exercise of such influence as they may have on the IRA. And there is no way on this earth that he can prevent legally Sinn Féin taking their places both in the Assembly and, if under the D'Hondt proportional rules, they have sufficient members to justify 2 members in government. Because they will say what they have said from the very beginning, and what I have told the Prime Minister on 3 occasions in the House of Commons. We are Sinn Féin IRA. We are Sinn Féin as a political party. We may be IRA as a paramilitary grouping, but as Sinn Féin, we have a mandate and we have no guns, we have no Semtex, we have nothing to do with the IRA except such influence. And let me say this. The agreement itself, the Belfast Agreement as it's officially called in the library in the House of Commons. Decommissioning. Participants recalled their agreement in the procedural motion adopted on the 24th of September 1997. And everyone out there should listen to this. And you quoted it earlier, Michael, that the resolution of the decommissioning issue is an indispensable part of the process of negotiation. Now, we have had a process of negotiation. We have arrived at an agreement, and not one gun and not 1 ounce of Semtex has been decommissioned. Not only that, but the IRA post-agreement have declared that they have no intention whatever of decommissioning anything.
So clearly there has been no resolution of the decommissioning issue.
Absolutely none.
Well, there are a number of things that Bob says that are plainly untrue. The first of those is that he says that the agreement contains everything that there is, and nobody can put anything into legislation that isn't in the agreement. Well, that's palpably untrue, because when it comes to the question of prisoners, it doesn't give any details at all as to how the prisoners' issue will be dealt with. That has to be put into legislation, and Bob will have the opportunity, like myself, of scrutinising that when it comes through. But it's not in the agreement. When it comes to the question of decommissioning that you're speaking about, the agreement doesn't outline the process of decommissioning. Why? Because that's in the Mitchell report. It's to do with the setting up of the international body, which has been set up and is sitting out there out the Newton Ards Road. So the suggestion that Bob is making, that everything that there is that's in this is in the agreement, is palpably untrue. But, of course, when he goes on to say that the prisoners' issue is one that is going to be delivered by the Prime Minister to the paramilitary parties, if I might put them in that kind of way,
well,
I don't
well,
they might, but I don't necessarily dispute that with him. But of course, that's going to happen whether or not there's a yes vote. He knows that as well as I.
No, I don't.
And one of the things that seems to me rather dismaying is that Bob isn't explaining to his own people the result of a no vote. He's not explaining to them what he and I know perfectly well, which is that
John,
the two governments are going to
not
move.
Attribute to me. Make your point, but don't attribute to me things that you allege I know perfectly well, because I don't know them perfectly well.
Perhaps,
you may know them, but I don't.
Perhaps Bob is ignorant of them then. We'll have to assume that. that the prisoners issue is going to be dealt with. And that issue is going to go ahead, whether or not there's a no vote. But if there's a no vote, of course, the Anglo-Irish agreement will continue, and there won't be any of the positive things from this agreement, like the entrenching of the principle of consent, like the taking away the territorial claim in Articles 2 and 3, like the opportunity for the people of Northern Ireland through the representatives to be at the British-Irish Intergovernmental Conference, like the possibility of ensuring that any North-South bodies that are established are accountable to the elected representatives of the people of Northern Ireland. None of those things will happen. There will, of course, be North-South bodies. There will be an intergovernmental conference. There will continue to be all the aspects of the Anglo-Irish Agreement which Bob campaigned against unsuccessfully for now 13 years. But a no vote will mean the Anglo-Irish Agreement continues without any of the good bits of this agreement, and all the things that Bob doesn't like about prisoners will continue anyway.
What about the specific point, though, that Mr. McCartney raises, and I think I'm quoting accurately from the document, the resolution of the decommissioning issue is an indispensable part of the negotiations.
Yes.
And it wasn't resolved, was it?
It wasn't resolved in the sense that the decommissioning didn't take place. That's absolutely true.
So it wasn't resolved.
That's
so
right.
why should we believe when we were told there would have to be decommissioning before talks and then decommissioning during talks, neither of which happened, why should anybody believe there'll be decommissioning after the talks?
Well, all that anyone can do in the course of this whole process is to try to get the best result that they can, and to try to make sure that there are some sanctions if people don't deliver.
What are the sanctions?
You see, well, the sanctions are going to be that people who are involved with such parties are not going to be able to take their seats as ministers.
Where does the agreement say that? Show me in the agreement, John, where it says that. Because it says quite clearly in the agreement, sets out what the requirements are. And all that is required of the parties actually in the parties representing paramilitary groups like Sinn Féin vis-a-vis the IRA, that they will use such influence as they may have on such groups that have weapons. That's all. And it also specifically says that personally he or she, who is either an assembly member or an executive member, if proved to have broken any of the pledges or other requirements, personally will be put out, not the party, just that person. And what is more, it is quite clear that they can only be removed if there is a special resolution, that is, if there is a majority in both the unionist community and the nationalist community, which would mean that the SDLP would, in such a case, have to vote to put them out. And if I can simply say, I can see no circumstances where, having gone to the trouble and have had all the world figures producing this agreement, setting up an assembly in which they are to share power and executive positions, would put them out if they were caught with anything less than a smoking gun in the hand of the particular representative. That was the experience, after all, Michael, in the talks, where they were put in the sin bin, the UDP and Sinn Féin, one for 3 weeks and the other, I think, for 2 weeks, for taking the lives of 5 human beings.
Yeah, well, I think it was 6 and 3, but
6
the
and 3,
details
whatever
are
it is. The point is that yet again, Bob is suggesting situations which simply aren't the case, in terms of the agreement, for example. He's saying that there's nothing at all in the agreement in regard to this. Perfectly clear in the agreement. And it's going to be amply clear in the legislation.
Show me in the agreement, John. I'm open to persuasion.
There has to be a code for ministers. And the code makes perfectly clear that they've got to support the principles of democracy and be opposed to the principles of violence.
Well, could I
so
ask
the question is going to be how that is put into legislation.
Well, supposing, John,
the words of the legislation are not spelt out there.
Supposing there are Sinn Féin ministers.
Yes.
And they are talking peace.
Yes.
And they are saying we support all this.
Yes.
And the IRA are banging away,
yes,
and killing people and blowing things up.
Yes.
And these ministers are saying, we have done everything we can to restrain them. We have used all the influence that we might have, and we are Sinn Féin. Yes. And we're for peace.
But Bob,
who is going to put them out?
You see, this is one of the problems whenever you walked out of the talks, Bob. You never saw what actually happened. You didn't see what happened. I'm about to answer the question.
Please.
The fact of the matter is they tried that on with us. They tried that on with us in Dublin. And we said, well, I'm sorry, we don't accept that. Don't forget, you came into the talks only on the back of an IRA ceasefire. That meant that you identified yourself quite clearly there. We saw the events last weekend. One of the things that those obnoxious events demonstrated absolutely clearly was that Sinn Féin and the IRA operated together. That didn't wash in Dublin. And that is why when we took the action in Dublin, in fact, they were removed. So what that makes very, very clear. And of course, they tried to take us to law about it. And it was impossible to do it. But the fact of the matter is, Bob, and I know it doesn't fit in with your arguments, and you'd like to make nonsense of the whole thing.
I find it absolutely amazing that you should be advancing.
But the fact of the matter is that it is able to be dealt with, and it is able to be dealt with by the law to which you have devoted so much of your life, and that's what the Prime Minister is making very clear.
When has it been dealt with? You have not managed, neither you nor anyone else.
It was dealt with in Dublin.
What was dealt with in Dublin?
When they were put out of the talks.
The IRA, Sinn Féin, who have been said by successive British governments to be one side of a coin of which the IRA is the other face, have gone right through these talks. They have reached an agreement which their Ardèche has endorsed in circumstances where convicted criminals, 27 of them, were released by the British government to go down and obtain that result.
But all this is irrelevant to the issue,
Well,
Bob.
please, triumphalist. They still have all their weapons. They have declared that they're not going to ever decommission anything. And you sit in that seat and tell the public out there that happy, happy land will arrive after we enter this assembly, and these people will suddenly be transformed into Democrats, and the IRA out there will suddenly become lovers of peace.
I didn't say anything of the kind.
Well, that's
But one of the things that you said in the past was that if there was a referendum that dealt with these kinds of issues, then on the back of that there would be a strong moral pressure on
such thing.
Well, actually, I do have a copy.
Well,
of that
I'm quite
here.
happy to debate
you have
that
a copy
with
of that.
you. Yes, and I have a copy.
But the point is this.
I thought you said you didn't say it.
Of course.
I didn't say it. That doesn't mean that's a total irrelevance.
Twist the thing backwards and forwards.
I can say I didn't say it and still have a copy of someone else's document.
So he's now saying that people make up documents.
That's totally illogical.
It's the same as when he started off in politics. He said he wasn't going to form a political party, and then of course he turned out.
Well, let's keep to the issues.
Of course, it's perfectly reasonable a man should change his mind. Perfectly reasonable. When the situation changes, quite reasonable that he should change his mind.
Of course.
And I don't blame him for doing that. Well, I don't think it's very good when he pretends he didn't change his mind. But the point is, in this situation, it is possible to use the law to make sure that people stick to it. But
when has that been possible to date?
It was possible.
When has it been possible
in
to
Dublin,
date?
whenever we were actually able to do the business. But you don't want to address that fact. But it is possible to do it. But you see, the point that's being ignored is the one I raised earlier on, Bob.
What is that?
And that is that if people were to follow you, which you know that they won't, you know the majority of people will vote yes. But if they were to follow you,
of the pro-union people will vote very solidly with me. Of that, there is no question.
And the rest don't matter.
No, I'm not saying the rest don't matter.
But if they vote no, and if people were to vote no, you'll still have the Anglo-Irish Agreement, won't you?
The Anglo-Irish Agreement represents consultative powers for the Republic. This new agreement represents actual substantive powers of governance by a North-South Ministerial Council.
So what you're saying, if I'm clear, is that you'd rather have the Anglo-Irish Agreement then?
I would rather have a claim than the fulfilment of the claim.
No, but
I would rather have articles. Just a moment.
You'd rather have the Anglo-Irish Agreement.
No,
is that
I'm not
right?
saying that at all. If you would give me a chance to respond to your question,
yes.
I'm saying that the Anglo-Irish Agreement, purely according to its terms, gives consultative powers to the Republic.
Yes.
I prefer that to an agreement which actually gives not just consultative powers, but actual substantive powers, executive powers, to the Republic. So if I've got to choose between that agreement and a far worse one...
Here again, Mike, I have to say that what Bob is saying is not actually the truth of the agreement at all.
Okay.
But what he's avoiding is the fact that a no vote will entrench the Anglo-Irish Agreement, which he doesn't like.
I'm sorry to break the flow. I'm sorry to break the flow, but we are going to take one quick break. But before we do, you have rightly brought up last Sunday in the triumphalism and the disgust a lot of people felt. But tonight, I want you two quick comments from you both, because we saw tonight Michael Stone arriving at the Ulster Hall in the reception he got. What do you think of that?
I think exactly the same as I thought about the previous one.
What do you think of it?
I think that those people, both the Balcombe Street people and Michael Stone, murdered men, women and children. But I think the British government and the Irish government, in order to achieve a yes vote, are prepared to murder justice, morality and the rule of law.
But what did you think of what you saw?
I thought it was disgusting.
Thank you very much. Quick break, back in a couple of minutes. back. Bob McCartney is here, Lord Alderdice is here. The point I put to David Trimble earlier is one I'd like you to address, which is that a lot of people were shocked to discover that the document isn't just strands 1, 2 and 3, but it is early release of prisoners particularly, plus other things, and they're now very reluctant to sign up to it because of the ancillary issues.
Well, it was one of the things I found very frustrating, you know, Mike, during the later part of the talks, when I kept saying to journalists, look, stop focusing all your attention on the attempt to get an honourable compromise with a unionist, nationalist and alliance. That's desperately important, and in the long run, that's the key thing. But don't forget there is also a key question here about the democratically rooted parties and the paramilitary parties, if I might describe them as that, and the difference between their approach to how we should organise things. And I kept saying it again and again, and there were parts of the structure of the talks, you know, the confidence building committee and so on, the whole question of decommissioning. There was a long period of time when that was a key discussion issue. It was probably talked about more than almost anything else. So in a way I can understand people being somewhat surprised when it's there because it didn't get all the reportage that it deserved. But the fact of the matter was those issues were there. I don't think that people are surprised, I have to say, that issues like prisoners and decommissioning are in the agreement. I think they may be unhappy about some of the provisions, and I think they may be unhappy also because the agreement doesn't give the details about how these things are going to be dealt with. It simply says, for example, there's going to be accelerated prisoner release. It doesn't say
within
that
2 years.
That's right. But what it doesn't say, and indeed what the No campaign haven't said about it, is the fact that there's thousands of prisoners have been released, that there's 50% remission already. This will go up
not
to
for
60.
murderers. Not for murderers, there isn't.
Since 1985, since the Life Sentence Review Board had been established, 600 lifers have gone out. There's only going to be about 400 more to be dealt with.
They're not getting 50% remission.
Indeed not. But they are getting remission. They're going out on licence. And let's be clear, all these people that go out are also going out on licence, as Bob knows. So yes, there are things in there that are difficult and uncomfortable, and I share the discomfort of it. But I also know very well that those things are going to happen in any case. The British government, the Irish government are going to make sure that that's the case. But if people vote no, what they're going to make sure is that some of the good bits that we worked so incredibly hard to get into the agreement are not going to happen.
Well, let's take some of the good bits that John has been telling us. First of all, that something new and fresh has happened about the recognition of the right of consent and the abandonment of the claim under Articles 2 and 3. That is absolute nonsense. First of all, the sovereignty of the Westminster Parliament has gone. There will be a repeal of the 1920 Government of Ireland Act, and both Bertie Ahern and Martin McGuinness have claimed this as a great triumph. Both of them have said Britain, the British people and the British Parliament are totally out of the equation about the future of the constitutional future of Northern Ireland. Both of them have claimed, particularly McGuinness, that their main aim was to get rid of the British claim of sovereignty, and they have succeeded in that by having the 1920 Act repealed. They have also claimed, rightly, because I am a lawyer, have also claimed rightly that the Act of Union of 1800 and the Northern Ireland Constitution Act of 1973 have been rendered inoperable, because the agreement provides that all previous enactments will be rendered subject to the new Act of 1998. So sovereignty has definitely gone out the window.
But what's wrong with that? What's wrong with the people of Northern Ireland being in charge of their own destiny?
It's not a question of the people of Northern Ireland being in charge of their own destiny. The people of Dorset, the people of Yorkshire, are all, well, if 99% of them claimed that they wanted to join Brittany or someone else, the sovereignty of a unitary state would say, sorry, you are part of the United Kingdom. Now, that's the first thing. I mean, I'm simply pointing out that British sovereignty has gone. Now, secondly, I want
it's not true.
No, it is true.
It's not true.
Well, the marker's down and you have a second. Well, you're debating with each other, so
Yes.
of course he's coming in and you come in on him. You didn't.
No, I waited
Take
until
your second
finished.
point.
My
My
second point is that the principle of consent, as in this agreement, is a total fraud, because all it permits is the majority to consent, can only withhold their consent to a transfer of formal legal sovereignty. What this agreement will do will put in place institutions that will create a factually and functionally united Ireland. And when that happens, the question of whether we give or withhold our consent to the recognition of what has already factually happened will either be irrelevant or unnecessary or inevitable.
Well, I think one of the things that's a bit disturbing at times about the way that Bob puts things is that he uses the considerable and quite rightful respect that he has as a lawyer to say to people, this is the way it is in law, because I know I'm a lawyer. And it actually, it actually cons people, because it's not actually true. I mean, if we take, for example, this business of any previous legislation being subject to any subsequent legislation, that's true for every act of Parliament that's ever passed. That's one of the points of the kind of legal system, constitutional system we have, that you don't have fundamental law to which you refer back.
You're talking about something.
In terms, I'm sorry.
You got a bit upset when John interrupted you.
Are you going to become John's protector then?
No, excuse me. I tried to say, let you finish when you were speaking, and now I'm just doing the same for John.
A moment ago you said it was a debate.
The problem, of course, is that Bob doesn't like me saying this because it undermines the kind of campaign that he wants to run, which is to harry people, a bit like the way he does in the court of law. They're saying, look, I'm the lawyer, I know the truth of this. The truth of it is that most of the bits of the Government of Ireland Act were already gone. And what this does do, and I know he finds this objectionable, that it does put the future constitutional position of Northern Ireland in the hands of the people of Northern Ireland and not of a Parliament in Westminster. Now, I understand why he's opposed to that, because he has a particular view of an integrationist unionist state, which, frankly, I don't think exists anymore with devolution and all of those kinds of things. But I'm far happier to have the future of Northern Ireland to be decided by the people of Northern Ireland than I am to have it decided by people in London. Or indeed anywhere else.
Can I come in?
And secondly, the second issue that he raised, this whole question of it effectively being a united Ireland anyway. Now, that's not true, because this whole business of a council of ministers is exactly what happens in Europe, and that hasn't made the states disappear. That's absolutely not the case.
That's the object. That's the very object.
European unity.
That's the object of it.
It is, of course, to bring us all together in the whole of Europe.
To have European unity,
united
and the North-South Council then is about Irish unity.
Yes.
That's your logic.
No, the North-South Council is about making sure that we don't do anything different in our relationships there than we do in respect of everything else.
Let the cat out of the bag.
I'm sorry, Bob. You can try to deceive people into saying there's something different happening here.
No, not at all.
It's not something different happening.
Can I make a point on what he's just said? This idea that we have suddenly been given something very new by the people of Northern Ireland deciding for themselves. The Sunningdale communique, paragraph 5, said that the status of Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom would not change until a majority of its people decided otherwise. Paragraph 1A of the Anglo-Irish Agreement said that Northern Ireland's position within the United Kingdom would not change until a majority said so. But both of them, even though and the Constitution Act was much the same, but although all of them said that, the United Kingdom was still saying that Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom, and that specifically is what Section 75 of the Government of Ireland Act. Now, what Britain is doing is saying, from now on, we're not claiming sovereignty. The people of Ireland, North and South, sort it out between them. And that is a fraud. Now, you hit a very, very sensitive point with John when he said, well, this is what happens in Europe. He fails to realise that the great debate in Europe is that the whole system is geared to functionally and factually and economically and banking-wise uniting Europe to form a federal, united political Europe. And exactly the same principle of a European functionalism is being used to create a factually and functionally united Ireland when it won't matter whether you give your consent or not.
Two issues on it. First of all, this agreement makes clear that Northern Ireland's position as a part of the United Kingdom is respected and is accepted by the Republic of Ireland in a way that was not the case in the previous
Where
things that
does
you
it say
mentioned.
that?
It says right at the beginning of the agreement. And
I
you need to
don't
read the
think so.
words, because it does. I was very, very clear about it.
I'm sorry.
One of the things that we negotiated very clearly, Bob, you weren't there at the time, and we did.
I can
and
read,
it was
though.
something that was achieved whenever you weren't at the game. The second thing is, as far as the development of Europe's concerned, I want to see Europe coming more and more closely
You want
together.
Ireland to be united
And
too.
within a united Europe, the issue of whether or not it's simply part of the UK, or whether Ireland is united up with the rest of these islands, is in the Council of Islands, all of these kinds of things can develop only with the consent of the people of Northern Ireland. And what I'm saying
They
is...
never could have done otherwise.
What is happening? Well, then what was a lot of your complaints about? What was all the opposition to the Anglo-Irish Agreement about, if it was so great? What you're telling us now is...
The opposition...
vote no.
Well, you want me to answer the question? You've posed a question. Could I answer it? You posed a question, what was my opposition to the Anglo-Irish Agreement? My opposition to the Anglo-Irish Agreement was that it gave the Republic powers of consultation over the internal governance of Northern Ireland, which was part of the United Kingdom. Powers which Gareth Fitzgerald said on the day after the agreement was signed went beyond consultative and stopped short of executive powers because of British sovereignty. What we have now is an agreement where you have executive powers. They don't have to stop short of being executive powers because British sovereignty no longer exists.
We have 2 minutes, by the way.
This is where Bob is entirely mistaken.
I'm wrong, I'm untrue, I'm mistaken.
The British and Irish ministers...
That's your answer to every
argument. The British and Irish ministers already meet in the Intergovernmental Conference. They've been doing so for 13 years.
And they will continue to meet.
And the executive authority that they have is already vested there, except for one thing. It has no input from the people of Northern Ireland. And if your no campaign were to succeed, it would ensure that none of that accountability happened.
Let me try.
And that you'd be left with the Anglo-Irish
I know this
agreement.
won't work. This won't work. 20 seconds each, because it's all we've got. Do you accept that if there's a yes vote and this works, we get to a situation where Ireland North and South, where the differences are much less marked?
I think that we will come closer in our relations, but the differences will still be there. Some of them for better, and some probably not.
You think there is an alternative. Do you think there is an alternative without massive violence?
There is an alternative if we are to deal with the IRA. If we are to say that the function of government is to appease terrorist demands by granting them, and that if we don't grant them, there is no alternative, then that is to yield to terrorist violence and to create a corrupt and depraved society like Michael Stone, the Balcombe Street bombers,
Bob McCartney.
Terror rules.
Bob McCartney, Lord John Alderdice, thank you both very
you.
much indeed. We have one more special insight for you between now and voting day next Friday. That is on Tuesday night. We're actually going to be on the air at 8:30. I believe we're going to do a full hour and a half, and we're going to go round the houses with many of the politicians from the various camps. But that's it for tonight. Thanks for your company. Good evening.